All right. Well, that did not go very well. I don't know what just happened. Everything shut down. So I apologize. Doesn't make sense sometimes. I'll give it a minute. See if people join again. We have pretty low numbers anyways, but I was hoping we would kind of pick it up. I don't mind doing TA for like 5 or 6 people, but it takes a lot of time, so I want to make sure like if people are interested that we're not repeating the same things. Well, this is what where I was going with this was that there is a pattern here of like continuation that happens sometimes when you break down and you come back up. And this oftentimes is left behind, and you might think it's like done, it never comes back. And then when it does, it's like that's where it returns to later. This is what happened on GME. So this is a rejection here of the top and a failure to advance with lower lows. We're seeing that there's a similar look here, but there's no strong, obviously strong rejection. Arguably, you could say that this might be an SOW right here. It's possible. So if that's the case, this could be a big widening, and that's not good. I'm not sure yet. I just started looking at this chart a minute ago. It's possible. I'm seeing what seems to be like a 4 top to me, and then it looks like a breakdown. Is it good that they fire the chair? No. Look, if you fire him and you do aggressive rate cuts, it sends a lot of mixed signals in the market. So I couldn't tell you like, is that ultimately going to be thought of as a good thing or a bad thing? I personally think it's a bad thing. I don't see how the market would react well to that. The idea that your central bank is now at the whims of a political power is not good. Like, at the end of the day, that's not a good sign. Period. I would take that as a very negative thing, personally. I can't imagine why anybody would think that that's a positive thing. Like, it's a very short-sighted way of looking at stuff. Would rate cuts send the market up? Maybe. But I don't have any other guidance on that. It's my opinion. That's wholly my opinion. Like, it's uninformed. I haven't read a bunch about it, you know. I don't think firing Powell is a very good idea. I don't think people realize, and if they're not in these circles where you're looking at these central bankers and stuff, I don't think people realize like the implications that would have. The only people that are really calling for Powell to be fired are like Donald Trump's cabinet. And then the people that follow that cabinet and believe everything and anything that cabinet says or does. And I'm not saying that in a mean way, because the same goes for like, you know, any president. There's always like the people that are just going to believe them no matter what. Everybody else has not. And like, where's the reasoning behind firing him? Like, yeah, they may have cause that they're trying to get rid of him, but it's because the optics are turning against the president at this point. Because he's claiming that his tariffs wouldn't have any kind of negative effect. And they clearly were seeing inflation rise this year. And the market's aware of this. And the market has mostly been supportive of the idea. that, yeah, they're probably not going to cut rates. There's an understanding there at least. It may not be the that everybody wants there. I mean, of course we want there to be rate cuts to stimulate growth, but we don't want to crash the economy either. And just look at it right now as like a lesson of patience. Like, what has him not cutting rates done for the stock market? Has it really hindered the stock market? I think in some ways you could argue that maybe small caps are hurt because they do get affected more by rate cuts. They still haven't really recovered from since the last rate cuts. I mean, when the market started rallying and it finally pushed the IWM Russell 2000 up, that was a big deal, but then it's been since down. But I mean, the rest of the market's been rallying without any rate cuts. So I don't really want to get into anything more political than that, but it just seems really silly to me to assume that firing him would be a good idea. I just think that's really bad for America, frankly. Like, I want my central banker to not be connected to a political party. And if you think that Powell's connected to like a Democratic Party ticket, I don't know what to tell you other than he was appointed by Trump. And I've already said it. It's like, if you believe that the economy is healthy enough right now to cut rates, then you have to simultaneously say that Powell has clearly done a good job in creating a healthy economy that 4 or 5 years ago inflation was rocketing to 1970s levels or whatever. I mean, you can't have both. Trump wasn't here during COVID. He didn't just magically make the economy better, Like, the Fed did what they did. We don't have to necessarily agree with all the numbers, but it's just a really silly thing to me. The main argument, as I understand it, about firing him is that they think he's costing the government billions of dollars because of higher rates. But sorry, you can't plan on somebody that's not your, it's like you have no control over that. You don't know what's going to happen. I don't know why he thought that could be part of his game plan. Well, Trump will cut rate, or whoever that's in that position will cut rates whenever I tell them to. Well, no, they won't. They shouldn't with any president. But I'm just a regular old guy from Nowhereville, so what do I know about political things, right? So anyways, do I think that there's a possibility that there's some strength left in this ticker right here? Yeah. I look at this kind of stuff. I think about M crosses. And again, at the end of the day, like, while there are certainly possibilities that this doesn't go super well, I kind of see this as a very simple, right now anyways, I can see this as a really simple M cross. So, hey, he asked for my opinion. I gave him my opinion. It's just an opinion. I don't think that it's better than anyone else's opinion necessarily. I just think he just asked about it, so I gave him an opinion. That's all. I'm not going to make a big deal about it. I'm just not a fan of anything. I really don't like any of our branches of government reaching beyond where they're supposed to. All three of them have had problems with that, and I just don't like it. And my thing is, like, they're supposed to keep each other in check. It's like the idea of separation of powers is fundamental to the Constitution and democracy. If you don't have a separation of powers and are not competing powers, then it doesn't work like it's intended to work. And it does present problems, I think. I think it really does. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to give the government all the power and strip it away from the people, just become China or something, like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So Anyways, so could this be potential bullish action going into earnings? That's really my question. Is this a good trade? You know, right now, I don't think this dropped into that oversold territory quite enough, but let's see. The last time it had already kind of left the trend here and then broke down farther. Yeah, and this is like an example of like, as a really good earnings or pretty decent earnings that still dropped it. And then it bottomed and goes crazy, you know, by the next earnings. So, yeah, if you had traded here at 77 and you traded for months out, you'd have been okay, but it wouldn't have been that great of a trade. It would have been better to trade from the bottom. So I don't know. This is a tough one. What's going to happen, man? I think if it makes a higher low here and can find some support, I don't really see any reason to doubt that it's going to run. There's certainly some gaps to the upside. I can see one right there. 116. It looks like there's another little one up here around 122. They're not huge. They're not gigantic gaps, but they're there. Yeah, and there's another one right here at 118. That didn't get filled. You see the closing value didn't get met again on the next candle. These are 4-hour candles, so. Yeah, so we've got some gaps above. What about keeping Powell and then trying to convince him to cut rates? That's not how that's the thing is like, that's not how Fed makes decisions. He doesn't have the final say per se. I mean, he might be like a tiebreaker, but they have a board, like they have a group. They vote on it. They have members. So if it's like a majority thing, then they cut the rates. That's my understanding of it. I mean, you read their notes. They have people that don't always agree with Powell, but he's just the chairman. I mean, if you're like the chairman of a board, you certainly have certain powers that others don't have, declarative powers and things like that, and you're supposed to be like a leader, clearly, but you're typically not the one that's approving everything. You're not doing it by yourself. That's not what the chairman of the board does. So it doesn't make any sense to blame it on him and then just sort of pretend like nobody else is involved. And it's going to be harder. It would be a lot harder to convince him that he was wrong considering inflation went up. And that's the other thing that doesn't make any sense here. I don't care who you are. Like, if you go to any third-party source, there's nobody else, almost nobody else, who could agree on, I guess you should say, like, that it has to be now, like that there's no other alternative. One of the things that I thought was very appropriate, but also kind of telling, was he was talking about future tense, and he was saying that you can make, Powell was, and he was saying you can make assertions about what's happened before, and that, well, the data is good now, but he said, but if you're not future looking, then you're going to miss it, right? I don't see anything inherently wrong with that statement. Again, you may not agree with him cutting or not cutting rates right this second, but if you just look at that statement by itself, should the Fed, should the central bank be looking ahead and saying, well, this is coming down the pipe in 3 months, maybe we should consider this? I think most of us are pretty reasonable people. We would say that makes sense. So it doesn't ring as untrue. I just find it to be a bit silly to say like, well, we should punish them because they're looking ahead. They're not just looking at data right this second. And some people are looking at data right this second and they're saying, well, the data is still as good as it was back then, or it's okay, or it's just fluctuating or whatever. Okay, but that's not looking at the impact of tariffs. And this is the big problem with the whole shebang, right? Is that people they want to just ignore tariffs. They want to say, well, it doesn't matter. And to some degree, it may not matter that much in the end. But I don't know, like look it up. I looked it up. There's frankly like no argument that tariffs don't increase inflation. Like it's comes out of thin air, like basically. I can't find a good argument. I've looked up essays about it, and economists agree that because you can look back at time, like it generally increases inflation. So what's the problem with just waiting and seeing if inflation increases and they make adjustments? And if it doesn't increase that much and the tariffs kind of roll out and they're not that bad, yeah, they should make cuts. I absolutely think they will. I think they're going to do it in September anyways. I don't think they're going to wait that long. I don't think they're going to do it in July. But I don't know, man. There's nothing wrong with them looking at the future and saying we don't know. And it really is one of those things where like everybody who thinks rate cuts should be a part of the future, they're going to use that in their model, and everybody that doesn't is going to use that in their model. And like, what are we really talking about here? You know, like what's the real problem with the rates staying as they are? Is it hurting Americans? Are we footing the bill? Are we worse off because they're higher? Some sectors are, yeah, arguably, and they definitely would do well with some rate cuts. Other sectors, I think, are pretty unaffected by it right now. I mean, mortgage rates are super high still. That's not a good thing, I think. Gets people stuck in a lot of high interest debt, but what are you going to do? I'm not trying to make like a blanket defense for Powell either. I think that I just looked at the data myself and I'm like, I don't know what I don't know. So all I can do is look at the data and make a decision for myself. I personally came to the conclusion that the Fed's approach doesn't really seem like nonsense. It seems like sensible to me. That's my personal opinion. It's not me parroting anybody else. It's just me looking at what I know I can look at and making a decision. But I don't make any policy, just like, you know, like there's nothing for me to do except just agree or disagree. So it's like, it's a fun little topic, but it's not. Do I think they'll convince him to cut rates? No. I think the political pressure, it probably gets to some people. They'd probably have more success if they went for other people instead of just calling Powell like names on social media and stuff. Anywho, so here's the deal. I think that this is clearly like gone off the rails right here in terms of its current uptrend. I can't really find another one, but I'm thinking is that it's this. There's an establishing of it right here, and then it's rejecting along it. It may be a little bit lower because some of these things, it's like you can use the top. You can use the top here on this, or you could use the place it drops off. And the place it drops off actually does a pretty good job of coinciding with this one, which is up here at 150. That's right there. And it's pretty much at that 122 gap. And then you can see that support and resistance here. Support, drop through, resistance, and then it's chopping. You can see that that's pretty darn close to what we then find later is an effective uptrend here. And an intersection looks like 150. So we may be narrowing in on a potential candidate for this S-curve, 150 around October. But between now and then, I suppose you could say that a lot of things could happen. So kind of have to just sort of wait and see if we can work this chart out and then see if there's a better answer. Why am I even looking at this? Again, because this has like a ridiculous year-over-year potential coming up for its earnings report. So I'm finding it to be a very high probability bullish move incoming. I'm not so sure about whether or not it's going to go back to like 93, part of me thinks that it might, because that's where you'd go for like a liquidity dip and just dump down real low. So I wonder if right before earnings or right at earnings, there's some kind of like a drop and it goes down there and then kind of rallies out, sort of like we saw back here, where this is like the midway point on that drop, and then just kind of rallies outward and upward. It seems right. It feels like something that would happen right there. Like try to go for that widening bottom, but then not quite getting it and only getting down to like the lowest portion there, and then really just like slingshotting up. So it's a bit tough. So again, maybe long-term options like October, mid-October, or after 150. Might be a good choice there. So I think this is a very, very potentially high yielding move. Another thing that sometimes you can do is take a kind of a measure of the first height, which is like, yeah, that's about right, because it goes to 86. That's like the halfway point, and then all the way up to 109. So it's a 58% move. And then the middle of the range here. Let's see if I can get the 58%. Yeah, that's about 147. So that's about the same. And then that makes more sense if you look at that and you say, well, that could be maybe a little too high. Well, sure, but that makes actually a lot more sense than looking at the big picture, because it hasn't yet reached up here yet. It could definitely use some kind of a pullback in this high liquidity zone back to dip down into low liquidity. It's typically where the spring goes. It sets up in high liquidity and then drops low if it's going to do it. That's why you see these dips are right below that high liquidity. So if it manages to do that, I think you're in a really good place to buy in. If it did hit like 93 or something like that, it'd be a really strong buy for me. In the meantime, it might not be a horrible idea to get like a longer position. It's still a really good move. Even if, it shakes out quite a bit and it only goes to like 145, it's still like a 34% move. So I'm pretty much thinking this chart is solid, unless they have like a really nasty miss or something and changes people's minds. This looks good to me. This looks like an M cross up. I wish I had a better... So I'm going to try one more thing and then we're going to move on. So this looks like the bottom of it to me right here, which makes sense. This is the low and then it builds out. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This is so weird because it comes down so low. So where is that trend at? I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to look at where it found those hooks, because I think I've got it pretty much in the right spot, but I want to say it's like right here, and I want to get it way off here. Hang on. I think rate cuts by themselves, while I'm dawdling here, rate cuts by themselves would probably be pretty good for the market, like overall. But I don't think that, I think you'll see that disbursement before it happens. You'll start seeing that shift from large to small caps again. Like it was trying to do it before. It did it before. We saw it happen right before our eyes. We called it out. We called out IWM's run-ups. When it was coming up through 200 or whatever the first time. Remember 202 and all that jazz. And it happened there. But I think you'll see something similar potentially. Yeah, this is probably it. I'm going to get rid of this one. And I'm going to leave it at that. So like that. I think this is probably the target range. I think this one's already been checked because it jumped over and it checked it pretty extensively here. These two bounced off and left. This creates a bit of a range. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like right on that pocket around earnings or shortly after. So we may have some sideways. I don't really know. I don't really know yet. It seems a little odd because it's so oversold on the 4 hour. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it reminds me a little bit of this setup. And this was a July earnings. It's very similar. So this is July, this is June 24th through July 16th. It's kind of chopping sideways. It had gotten oversold. But the chop doesn't yield a, this actually has like that lower low push. So did that happen here? Can't really tell. No, it didn't happen here. Unless you count that, but I don't think that's it. So a little different. There's nothing overtly bearish just yet. There's no second drop after the big volume. Not really. No. What we'd have to see in order for this to be kind of bearish is some kind of a weakness here. I think specifically we come back beneath like 102 and then drop perhaps. Here, let's do this. One more thing. I always say that. It's like Columbo. GLBE. I can check that out. Yeah, this all seems right to me. I mean, there's a lot going on right here. This creek cross and everything. Yeah, maybe... that was a bad one. So again, you might be like, I don't even know what this is. This is an energy company. They're expected to be year-over-year growth of over 1,000%, which is kind of crazy. I'm not anticipating anything other than upside in the little bit longer term future, but downside is very much a possibility in short term. So I'm trying to do my best to sort of mentally kind of map out what I think is likely to happen if it does have downside. You know, where would it go? It hasn't broken out yet or broken down yet. So if this is an auto reaction, you may get a phase B top here and then come down. I mean, who knows? If the reaction goes the other way, it goes the other way. If it comes above, it comes above, right? 111. That's kind of the floor right there. I think if it comes above that and holds support, you might have a case for bull action. It kind of just sits on it and it has a healthy backup here. This may not end up dropping very much below what's already available as the bottom, which is 103. So there's another place I might mark off at like 102.80 or something like that, just to see if it drops below there. I'll just do 103 because we don't know what this is going to do yet. If it comes up too high and it pushes above 111.45 and then it drops, I think it's likely bearish. If it stays below it, but does come over the previous top, it could still be bullish. I think there's a better chance it's actually bullish. So a higher high without breaking. And of course, if it just drops and then hooks, it drops and then hooks. Like that could totally be another situation here. Pretty much the exact same thing. It just comes up after. And a lot of times in the phase B top, you actually do need a breakdown to sort of distinguish the two. So you'll get this kind of, it seems almost more likely. You'll get this kind of a dip. Here. And then it'll jump back above. And that's how you know it's a phase B top instead of just another part of the auto reaction. So that wouldn't surprise me either to see it kind of drop here and then push back up. And then we'll see where the bottom is. So I guess my point in all this was just to say, like, oh, there's a gap way down here too at like 95. This might be a very, very good setup. Maybe that got filled. Take that back. Yeah, that got filled. Never mind. I don't think there's anything else there. Still, it looks like it's kind of converging. So this might be a really good one going into earnings to watch. And I do think genuinely it could have a pretty huge 30 to 40% move going into it. So I'm just cautious right now because I'm wondering if there's going to be another drop here, like a second bottom going into earnings. I just feel like it's very possible. So anyways, that's a good one. Wanted to go through that and just see it, and I'm glad I did it. I've touched on, oh crap. I've touched on Nintendo before. Actually, when I talked about Nintendo, I talked about it a long time ago when it was like $14. And the reason I talked about it back here was because there's a humongous, and people love these cup and handles, but this is like a real cup and handle where you have an actual, like a macro setup for it. And that's what you want. The lack of macro setup doesn't mean it couldn't be a cup and handle, but a lot of times people identify cup and handles in like really short terms. And I just don't think that's very common. There's not a lot of data out there for really short-term cup and handles. There's macro data for like macro cup and handles that last at least 6 to 8 weeks. And usually 16 weeks plus is even better, is what you find. So this to me was like a really strong cup and handle. Like I've never seen one quite as strong as this. And so I talked about this. Now this was, leading up to stuff that obviously is voted Wiffle, the company, the Mario movie, like becoming more like a Disney almost company, and having theme parks open up, and then also their new console, which is sold like hotcakes and all that jazz. This to me though was a really, really, really clear cup and handle. So I bought in. I have shares from like $12 to $14 while it was down in this area, and I was saying that really based on most cup and handles, if you look at their breakout targets, they typically go about the height of the cup, which is kind of crazy, but they do that from like the handle. Now, there's different methods of kind of interpreting it. Some people are going to look at it and say, well, it's like 50%. Well, yeah, if it's 50%, then it already did it. It broke out and it did it. And you're like, well, that wasn't very much. Yes and no. I mean, if you look percentage-wise, if you got in again and with an average of like $11 to $12, you're talking about 100% move. Like it's a big move. The other method of thought is it's really like a full-on macro, like entire width of the bowl, and from the bottom of the handle, the breakout. Some people measure from the breakout, but I think you're supposed to measure from the bottom of the handle. Anyways, the point is that leg up goes to like $65. Okay? Again, some people are going to sit here and be like, I don't want to invest in that for whatever reason. I don't know why. Maybe because it's a Japanese company. Maybe because it's not your favorite game company or something. I don't know. But my point is just that, look, if it has a retracement, and right now it's got a wedge action, so it's a bit of a mixed bag. Like after it broke out, it immediately goes into this like wedging action right here. It's not the worst wedge I've ever seen, but it's a wedge nonetheless. And it broke down. So again, it could hold or could not. Either way, this looks like a kind of a double topping action on RSI. So you're getting that kind of classic like M-top cat ear thing. Last time it did this and peaked, it kind of went sideways for a while. So I wouldn't be overly surprised to see it kind of come down and go sideways again and really build off this 18 to 15 support. And for me, it's like, okay, well, as long as it doesn't drop back beneath $16 roughly, this is still a huge potential play. And I did not do any kind of options trading on this. All I did was invest shares, and I was like, I'm like 100% up repeatedly. I've like invested and reinvested on backups and stuff over time. So this has been one of the biggest money makers that I have. And I don't talk about it that much, but it's there. And they pay dividends, so it's nice. When you look at this and you back up, if it runs again from even, anywhere around, again, $16 to $19, you're talking about the potential for a near 300% move. And I've looked at this every which way. There's certainly possibilities of corrections here and there. There's been some really big corrections, but I don't know what to tell you. Like, there's not a really better example of like technical bowl structure or cup and handle than this. So in my opinion, it probably hit target 1 already, which was around $25. But target 2 is very high. It's like 60s. And this did have a split, and it used to be like $60 or something a share. It's cheaper now, but to me, it's like a no-brainer. The company's been around for like 150 years. They're highly profitable most of the time. They have had some problems in the past, but they're turning into a regular, they really are. They're turning into like a regular Disney type place. They already have a Legend of Zelda movie planned for next year. They picked the actors. It's all over the news today. I don't know the actors, but they look fine. I don't know. They look fine for the role. Who knows? The script is garbage. It's not going to be good anyways. That's the way video game movies are. If the script is good, maybe it'll be good. They've got the Donkey Kong movie planned. Yeah. So I just don't see this as like, this seems like a really cheap entry to me. And on this kind of a macro target level, this is a very appealing chart to me. Even though, yeah, it's got some weaknesses here in the top, I just don't see a big deal. Like, I feel like this is going to be another buying opportunity going into 2026. So, yep, that's all I'm going to say about that. I just wanted to bring it up. Coin. Yeah, I've said it before, and I'm genuinely serious. It's one of my best tickers. It just consistently has been very strong, and their company's made all the right moves in the last decade or so. So I'm not having I don't really have anything negative to say about them right now. I don't see why they wouldn't do really well. This is Coinbase. So Coinbase, as you guys are aware, some of you, I actually have I think I have an account with them. It's been a minute because I invested in some Doge and some other crypto through them, but Coinbase is one of those leading crypto platforms. This reminds me a lot of like NU's chart when it hit the bottom here and advanced. It took a long time to kind of catch up to itself here. It looks like it went into a spring and then a creek jump. So there's an auto reaction and then a phase B top, and then it drops into a spring, and then it jumped the creek way down here, and then advanced again and went to an SOS. It would have been a challenging one, I think, to get right because it looks kind of odd. I don't think it's as good of a Wyckoff example as you could make, but it's all there. So long term, I guess what I'm most curious about is, are you in a good place to continue advancing I mean, to me, it looks like it. Aside from it being overbought, I'd say it looks pretty strong. So recently, let's take a look. And they have earnings coming up on the 31st. So it's around the corner. Yeah, so it looks fine. This is a very expensive one, so it's not for everybody. I may not be able to invest in it. We'll see. Unless you're doing like a quick in and out kind of play. It may not be great, and it is expensive. But I just wanted to check the chart out, so we'll see. Is it going to come back to 275? That seems really low. Seems really low. Yeah, this is looking kind of weak. But to me, that's like good because there's like opportunity there. You see that rise? It's bullish in that it's got strong buyers. Don't get me wrong. I can see the strength in the buying back here. That's really bullish. And even here is decent buying. What do I think about this being like an S curve versus like a top? Did it have an SOW? A sign of weakness. Did it have a dip? I don't think it did. There's one pattern, if I'm going to pick one thing that really kind of gets me the most stuck, it's probably this one, which is the rising. It's not quite a wedge. It's almost like a rising cat ear where it does have the appearance that it's going to like drop. But I've seen this before where it drops and checks that creek and then it just takes off and it ends up being a like an S curve. So basically this M cross is just incomplete. So there is a dip because there's a rising wedge. There's a divergence here too on RSI, but then it turns right back around and it turns into like a continuation model. That seems a bit much, but like in terms of movement, that's a lot. But I think that, that could end up going to 520 or something if it did that. I'm not so sure about this one though. Why right now? Well, it wouldn't be that fast. I guess I didn't even try to do. Oh, no, there is a weakness there. Okay. It looked like something that was like a weakness because it has this really weird wick on it. Really low wick. Let's check this out. All right. So this is a little more realistic in terms of timing. There's a potential here for just a quick backup and then a rally into earnings or right out of earnings. That comes pretty far. That's a huge move. It's a bit, again, this is a bit expensive, but it's a 50% move. I think what I'm more curious about, though, is there a possibility this comes down really low? I'm not a big of a fan of this chart, I think. It's like got a lot of issues. This makes sense because of that liquidity shelf, and it's like halfway through the range. So it's like an SOS with a backup. But it did do a really good job of checking that creek already. Like that's multiple hits on that creek, so it probably wouldn't go to there. It'd be more likely to come back if it did check something this one, and that's pretty low regardless, but not actually come that far down. I don't know, maybe. So that divergence didn't begin that long ago. It really began on this previous top, like 378, which I think lends itself to the idea this could have a backup before earnings that just kind of comes back to check that creek and then goes. I'm not a big fan of this, again, because of the price, but long term, is this potentially like hyper bullish? Yeah. I mean, it could be very, very bullish long term. So, well, something I did must have really irritated a lot of people. We're down to like 4 people now. Yeesh. He really didn't want to know about Coinbase. I don't know. Should I answer the questions that people ask? Because I feel like, are you still there? Kush, are you still there? Rough day. Don't worry about it.
All the people left you?
All the people left me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now that I have the moment, I thought in this mode, well, what if there's something that we didn't know? So I just started a creative file to see if there's something, and turns out, there's something beyond your imagination.
Oh, that's cool.
You can make like entire like giant bases.
Oh, neat.
Looks like that.
Very cool. Oh, man. Curtain drop. So this looks more or less bearish to me. But you got to understand why I'm going to say this. This is very, very, very often the case that this is bearish. There is a hard drop here with a consolidation. To me, it looks more like, again, a continuation pattern. Yeah. And I really don't want to misread this one, though, because this has the vibes of like a... Let me go to the weekly. Let's see here. EPS numbers are negative. I mean, they're beating, and then it's pretty low. That's a pretty low revenue. So without even looking at it extensively, I think I'd have to suggest that this is probably a little high in terms of value. I don't know, where does this come from? What is this even about? Global E Online? I don't know what this is. So we have this long-term trend. There's a little bit of weakness here and there, and then like it's pushing through that trend. And then you have this really gnarly sell-off that comes all the way through it. There's an up thrust, and then it comes back down. Thus far, it hasn't made any of their highs or lows because it's just been consolidating. It's been consolidating around high liquidity, just slightly underneath it. You can see that shelf was the attempted sell down level. I'm thinking that this is one of those examples again of like it's a distribution, but there may be in my opinion, it's a distribution, just volatility wise. That's what it looks like to me. But there may be a final like up thrust, UTAD. Seems very likely. So this looks like a cross up and over. And then there's a secondary creek here that's really more oppressive in some ways. So is this a good buy? It's weird because this looks like it would be like right in my wheelhouse. This is like the same kind of stuff I look at all the time. You'd think that I'd be like super confident right now. Yeah, so this is testing below that trend. It's crossing up 1, 2, made the cross. It just needs to break out, and then it's probably going to have a pretty big burst in store. I'm going to estimate right around there. That looks right. So where is this a buy? And where do you get out? I don't think it's going to go above that because it doesn't need to check that again. So that's not likely going to be hit. There's a gap way up here. I mean, I guess it could go all the way to that gap. What I'm trying to really find is that place where it dropped off. It looks like the same, like a very similar parallel of sorts. 2.5, 26.25. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just a parallel. Let's try it. And where would it have to go in order to, if it was distributive, in order to kind of distribute? So this actually is fine. It made a higher low, I think. Let's make extra sure here. So that goes down to 30.43. This goes down to 30.64. So it did actually hold up. That's good. That's more of a bullish sign. I mean, if this had dipped low and then come up, I'd be more concerned. That's the support right here that's trying to get. You can see that was lost, so it's right on it. This might have been a really good call for whatever it's worth. If it holds on right here and breaks, I think you're in a very strong position. Let's just put it that way. It's still got to get over this middle area around 34 to 35, but it looks like it's above that support. So to remain bullish, it holds here. It breaks this first creek, which is a really short-term one from like July 10th, just the past few days. Again, ideally this goes ahead and it backs up and hits it, and then it jumps all of these all at once in like an SOS right here at the top. So if it breaks above 34, let's just say 34.40, I think, and you hold support there, I think you're going to see a nice push. And then what I was trying to look for is like, where else would it go if that holds up? I personally would say and suggest that this looks more like, again, looks more like a cat ear to me than anything else. But here's why I'm not like I guess what I'm trying to say is here's my thoughts on big versus small here. You have one move up, and then there's just like micro 1-2. So this does look like a cat ear to me, but I'm wondering if it jumps over that creek, isn't that a creek cross? Shouldn't that result in a big move up? And it should. I mean, typically if you get that middle, the lower M, so the larger structure here is legitimate, if that's the case. Yeah, that's the same mark. It looks like they already went there. So, see that right here? This is where it first hit bottom, and this is where it left. And then this is where it ends up when it comes back up. So this might be the wave up. That's way out there in October. Isn't that too slow? If this is a macro push, it might be too slow. Let's see what the last trajectory was. That's like right into earnings. They did that last time too, ran up into earnings. What's the percentage on that move? That's really far, but that's 50% move. What exactly would be tested here that wasn't already tested? Like a back test on this area, I guess. Yeah, way back in 2021. It's not that far ago. There's a level right there. That's in mind. So I'd say right now, I wouldn't look at this as a particularly strong chart long term, because I'm curious about this also as a iterative motion, like 1, 2, and then 3, and then this is 4, but it's an outward iteration. I wonder if 5, I'm curious about it. So I wonder if it does the same thing. Oh, okay. So let's not get too ahead of ourselves here. So the way I'm looking at this is like typical cat ears have that repetition on the second part, and that's what gives it this kind of flat look. And long term, you know, you come back later, it looks like this kind of boring, like flat structure. I think this might be the same structure, and I think it's going to do, I think it's already done it a third time here, possibly. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But the reason I'm saying that is because this actually did creek cross here, but it's generating creek, creek, creek. Repetition is there. So it's, if you look at the repetition of motion, it's certainly there, and then this would be like an M cross up. So I wondered about why this looked like it would go way far at first, or at second, when we did it the second time, as opposed to just stopping like right here. And now I'm thinking that's probably what's going on. So 1, then where do you see 2? Yeah, honestly, it's kind of hard to say, but I wonder if this is like an SOW or something at earnings instead. So outward iteration wise, this actually makes more sense than going all the way up, which seems really, really far. Like, I think that's a goal. I know why it would be a goal, but I don't think it's going to do it right this second. If it does, oh well, but I don't think it will. I think what's going to happen is you're going to get another M shape that fits the bigger one. So the wave is working itself out, and it needs to kind of find that support. So it'll come down and it'll find this support way over here again. Like it already tried to do it once. It probably would do it again, and it will find the support. But the problem is going to be that it does it at the to the downfall, I suppose, of this trend. So this gives it a very meaningful iterative pattern, because the first one did the same thing, didn't it? Because this actually hits a low and then it comes down below, and you can see it pushes through here. And if you look at the M cross itself, it loses its pattern right there. So then on the big picture, you'd have like an M1, M2, and it may even be smaller than that to start, but you'd have this one and then this one. So it loses its pattern and dips below. It doesn't make like a new low, it just makes a new motion. This is just a guess, but I'm thinking this is the wave out. And then probably comes down and tries to dip back below one more time. So maybe it leaves something open or something like that. Yeah, it's hard to say without sort of reading the tea leaves of the future. Yeah. That's 2026 right there. That's that February date. We keep seeing that pop up. That's interesting. Okay. Well, it gets a little more complex after that. I don't really want to go into any more iteration stuff. I guess the big question was, is this a good trade? I think short term, it's possible. The danger of cat ears is always in the drop. And the thing that I always kind of stress with them is that you have to be mindful of where your weaknesses are and where those things will ultimately turn sour. Because this still looks like a cat ear to me, which means that on some level in the back of my head, I'm thinking this could just be like an S curve down. You know, it's often in the middle of something. However, if it crosses a creek and it breaks out, I think then you have to just sort of take it for what it is. I mean, as straightforward as it can be. So there is a low creek here. This is the high risk part that I'm going to talk about. That's right there. And that's the one that's going to get you really burned. So there's a lot of danger in this. I would suggest not seeing a lower low is obviously ideal. But as an S curve goes, that's where that S curve comes down. And if you might think that's too far, but you got to remember, like the first time it dropped, it did the full drop here. You know, the second time would be very similar, potentially. So there's certainly a possibility that it drops all the way down to like 25. That changes everything quite dynamically. So you have now you have a different iteration set up where it's downward instead of upward, or at least outward in our case. So the reason why I said this looks like promising is that it didn't make any lower lows here. It held and made higher low. The M cross, even though it doesn't make a higher high, it's all inside of itself here. It's narrowing. That implies a big move is coming. It seems to have gotten above this kind of like sticky zone in the middle, and this is where when it dropped in, this is where it hit that first support. That's typically what you see on a breakout, is this kind of come back up above that. So right now, because this M jumped over the creek, came down, landed on it with a higher low, it looks like it could be just a spring, and that's a positive. And when I say spring, I mean that this right here, dropping below the previous bottoms, doesn't seem like a whole like bad thing, you know, like a bad deal. So what would it look like if it turned bearish for whatever reason? Well, I suppose any kind of an upthrust here to like 33.50, 33.60 that comes back below the creek, it would be both. It would come like up and then back down. That could be read as a bearish signal. An upthrust to about 35 again, and then coming back through that creek, bearish signal. The volume here is not particularly great. And then the RSI hasn't jumped up and over yet. I'm kind of looking at that right now, raising an eyebrow, because it's like, well, that looks okay. The safest way to play this would be to not invest until it holds a support and breaks out here. Is just avoid the guesswork and just let it do its thing. Get the creek crosses. If you want to play a little more risky, you could trade from here and just watch it. But I think there's enough here to warrant caution. This is where that rubber meets the road. Because the move itself, I think from that point forward, is probably going to be to this 37 mark, which is very readily being used. You can see it as an anchor right here. And again, potentially beyond there, there's a wave breakdown right there. It may go up that high. So I'm kind of throwing out some guesswork, but I'm thinking like this is the pocket right here at 38. That's not a humongous move, but if you play your cards right, that could be a really good move. I don't see anything wrong with that. And then I would be cautious. I don't know what to expect. It's a bit of a gamble, I suppose. You know, on the one hand, what happened last time, if it repeated itself to a degree, would be you would back up and find support on the creek and then advance again. But it didn't go beyond, from what I can tell, well, it didn't go beyond that gap down level. That ledge, which would be here. So it wouldn't make any sense to go beyond that. We'll see. This will set a precedence, though. So the stronger this is, the better, I suppose. If this comes up and it makes a higher low and jumps over, I mean, you're in a much better position. Obviously, going into earnings, you'd be like $40 a share or something. But you're also in a better position, big picture, because now you can come back down on top of the next parallel, and it's just a lot stronger. So all the way up to 80 for Friday. I don't know, man. That's more of a YOLO kind of play. I can't really predict why it would go up to 80 all of a sudden. Maybe there's something in the news that's people are looking for. What I'm trying to suggest is this may be an iterative motion. That's kind of in my opinion, that's like the strongest thing that this could be right now. So that would be a pretty big move, but it could take some time. If it's iterative, it comes back to like 50. That's what I'm guessing. However, you know, we look at these things from a helicopter standpoint, it's kind of like, how does it get there? Usually the usually this is like a widening, I guess. Is if I had to pick one thing, I'd say it's probably like a widening. So the reason that this is dangerous in other ways to say that it really all that has to happen is it goes up above like 38 or 30, even like 36. And if it starts sliding backwards, it's done. You know, if you see this pop up and then it comes back down through here, like that's it. You know, it's going to go really low because then this becomes like a macro S curve down. So it doesn't take much to turn this from really, really okay, like an okay play, like it looks like pretty safe or at least a decent chance of being bullish to being very not good, very, very fast. Because it doesn't take much to distribute here, like in terms of distance. But, you know, I'm reminded of like what happened in, I mean, it's not the only example, but there's places between cat ears in like 2000 and 22, right, on AMC, for example, that you could use as an example to suggest that maybe it has that narrowing and then a widening here, breakout motion. I don't know. This feels likely to me, if I'm just going to throw out a guess. It feels very likely it stops short of coming up above 50 again. So this kind of builds its way back out and then dies here and drops. And the reason I think that is because I'm looking at this wave like it seems really obvious, and it's not just because it's a January, February date, though I suppose that's part of it. It just seems really obvious to me that there's a potential here for a wave going into December, like up, down, up again. Again, that may not bode well if it drops because it could go really, really low, but I mean, the reaction would be there at least. This is one I think you could probably watch closer to maybe December. It may not have the best trade right now. I'm looking at a short-term potential for pop to 37, but yeah, I don't know anything about 80. No idea. Baba, Alibaba. Alrighty. Well, so this is one that I guess a long time ago I used to look at this quite a bit. I haven't really checked it out in a while. I guess that's a good thing because it's come way down since 2020. So let's just ask the simple question of like, does this have a reaction, make a higher low, and then make a higher high? The answer is yeah. What's the problem? Well, no huge problem except that it just didn't. I don't really love the bottom. There's a lot of volume in this reaction, a lot of divergence. This would have been a great play here, seeing that divergence and watching that ricochet back out. I think at this point, really just trying to see if it's going to keep crossing up and over your creek levels. So that's fine. You know, I was wondering, I was like thinking in my head, I wonder if it's like channel bound. It does look a bit channel bound to me. Just drawing. Hold on. Thinking too. Not a huge fan of that. Just looks like it needs to correct. Okay, let's take a look at something. Yeah, so this is just one of those ones that has it's got high risk, high reward, because I do think that this could be a macro bottom, like a huge bottoming. I don't, however, know if I could say that it's certainly out of the woods yet, because I hate to draw a comparison to AMC, but like this pattern does have a lot of similarities. Like, not everything is AMC, right? That's kind of silly. But it has a lot of similarities to that 2020 pattern. And so I'm wondering if we need to see, there's a good reason for that, right? So like at first glance, you might say, well, they're not the same. They shouldn't be compared, right? They're not the same at all. Well, no, they're not. But there's good and bad to that, because the good is that, you know, if you look at long-term comparisons, this thing could be like way up on the moon. The bad being that, you know, there's a difficulty, I think, in ascribing those same details and assuming that it's going to do the same thing. You don't really know that. But there's also the sense in which this is very much just white coffee and trading like 101. There's a, you know, a bottom, so you got support, and then you get an auto reaction, and then you get like a phase B. And I don't know if this is the best way to describe that just yet, but that's where I'm going to go with that. And then usually this comes back up, and it did. You can see it came back and it checked that top already, and it's an SOS. It's strong. You know, from a parallel standpoint, it didn't actually break out. So it's still in like a downward channel. So I don't see it as a creek cross yet. That's where I'd be kind of concerned, is like, I don't think it jumped the creek. So if I'm guessing, and I'm just kind of saying, like, I think this is probable, that could be like a phase B bottom. And then you have an attempt to drive the price down here. The curiosity I have, of course, being like, that is a climax in volume. I don't know if that's the selling climax. So that would be like, oh, it jumped, yada, yada, yada. But I'm just thinking, like, doesn't look right to me. It looks like it hasn't. It's very easy to imagine this being another downward motion over time. It's very slow. This ticker doesn't move particularly. I mean, it moves fast when it goes up. You can see those motions are huge. And then some people are going to look at this and be like, well, that's dumb because this is already out in an SOS here, it's like consolidating around this top, and I agree. So there's a bit of both. So I'm seeing a widening. That's concerning. If that were to break down in the future, you know, there's a good chance that you're going to have and it does look like it may have broken right there with a little bit of a weakness. There's a good chance you're going to have like a fallout all the way back to that floor at 64. Probably to retest this jump or something like it. And then you're ready for a spring, you know. You can think about it on a macro scale of like it's basically the exact same thing has happened twice. Because it has. Because this motion right here is the same motion as this one. In fact, it's almost identical, except for how far it goes, right? It doesn't go very far. So you can see that kind of copy-paste nature to it. That's a good thing, long term. It's not necessarily a good thing short term, because what came after that motion was downside, right? It did this back down to the bottom. So I don't love doing bars patterns, but if it helps, I'll do that. I think it's worth using if it helps. So you look at the remainder of like what happened here. Pretty much, this is not going to be an easy one to do. Could have probably skipped that other part, but my expectation would be that whatever your spring is happens like here on the next iteration. So this would be like a spring and a retest. So something like that. Which, it's whatever. It doesn't have to be the same. In fact, it would actually make more sense if there was a change of character, since this looks weak and this looks stronger. It would need to kind of show something more of like its teeth here. So actually having it come up a little higher might actually be good. I mean, and we do this stock well to have a real spring. And then I think you can have like an exit that's fairly strong. So yeah, these are even hitting like the same markers, like in everything. You can see that. It's like contained right there. So the pattern is absolutely repeating. It's doing it in a more compressed way. That's pretty typical of like a buy up, buy up. I know I mentioned AMC, but it's a good example in this case because it is an accumulation model in 2020. There's nothing wrong with looking at it as just hey, this is just a chart that has an accumulation in it. We don't have to do any kind of more direct comparisons than that. But the idea behind that is fairly universal, and you can see this one on a micro or a macro time frame. It doesn't really matter. But this motion right here and this motion right here as a repetition of themselves is quite normal and almost identical in some ways, right, to the same pattern. So I'm looking at it like, oh, they're the same. Well, they are in some ways, It is repeating and it is boring in some ways because it's like, well, it's just doing the same thing. Yeah, I know. That's quite literally like the same idea here. And you're even getting like that motion here where this is like the drop in, up, up. This is very wide, and notice that it's all contained down low. You got a similar motion here with like a drop in. And it's all down low, right? It's all contained. And you're going up, and then you're going up again. That very much is like the same thing. Look at the place in which that happens, right? You can draw a direct comparison from here to here on that bounce. And it's the same idea here on AMC. You get the similar region of bounce right here. There's that drop in, doesn't go quite as low, and it goes up, across the middle, up again, right? So the reason that I'm pointing to this as like an iteration is because this is really the same thing. It just goes back to the phase B concept of like, yeah, it needed to make a spring. It did make a spring by going below and then comes back above the top, breaks out. So I think Alibaba is in this situation right here where it's generating like sideways, which causes people to like have interest in it because it looks like an SOS. The only thing that kind of bothers me about it at this particular moment is if you look at this is all upward motion, especially this reaction. It's clearly upward. This is pretty weak. It didn't come above the previous top. It does it again. So I'm not sure if that means that there was a longer buy-in over here. Clearly you can see that markup very evidently here on the RSI. You can see the consolidation almost like a triangle, right? Boom, 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 and then it breaks out. You can see the M cross very, very clearly here. You know, so it's kind of like, well, what are you waiting for then? Are you waiting for some other final drop? Well, don't know. You know, that's a tough one. And I haven't really looked at RSI on AMC in a long time from back here. That's not RSI. So I don't really remember what it looked like. Let's check the weekly and just see. It was mostly divergent. It was already like going up. Let's go back to the daily. Yeah, not really the same. Because there's no creek jump. Like, it doesn't happen there, so I don't know. That the loss of comparison. Right. That's a whole nother bag of worms I don't really want to mess with. Bag of worms. People don't say that. They say can of worms. Well, that makes sense. This is a pretty strong chart, so I'm not purposely looking for chinks necessarily. I'm just trying to see what the options chain was doing. All of this looks right because this comes back up and tests the floor. This has a little dip before that. And that's what makes me wonder. It looks a little bit weak to me. This is unnecessary. Unless you're testing your buyers and sellers and you think they're going to fail, and they did. Buyers, I mean. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen here. You could get a burst move to like 130s, test the top again. You know, there's no breakdown that I can see. I suppose if I were going to pick one out, it'd be this one. It suggests that it did drop that ledge, but it hasn't lost here yet. So it's kind of missing certain reactions, I guess, what I'm trying to say. So I wonder if we get some kind of like another cross up and then it comes back through it or something. Like, I'm not sure what that would look like. If it's going to go down, I mean, it'd have to have some kind of an obvious breakdown. It hasn't happened yet, so. I wonder if you'd have something like this. I don't know. So let's say like the earnings was a win, like a beat. And so it ramps up and kind of doing pretty well, and then it just has a burst, right? And that at first would definitely look like it's jumping up and over, and it could, if it did, it does, you know, like, so if this goes up and over here and then holds up, I guess it could just keep going, you know? But my thought is that you would use that as a kind of a head fake and then come back down. It's just another way to sell down. So they've already have like a weakness here and a weakness here. So trend weakness, trend weakness. So then it's just an iterative weakness. So then you've got iteration 1 hook, iteration 2 hook. So the rest of it becomes this sort of copy paste version of a negative outcome, like a bad outcome, right? Or I should say bullish, or bearish, sorry, because not everybody thinks that that's necessarily like a bad thing, I guess. But like this would be iteration 1, which is it's already lost that trend. So it goes to find the previous one, or excuse me, the next one. And then it bounces, you know, and you have basically a loss of direction there. And then the same thing applies here, like a change in direction is what I mean. You come back down, and again, change in direction here. So these iterations build out in a more negative way instead of a more positive upward motion. And after that point, it's out of the widening. So like it's going to come back down to probably right where it started, which is right here. So it's going to, if it does that, it's going to come back down to 73. And I'm wondering if that is where there's an anchoring, if you will, for this to again occur. Just sort of like how this builds itself out and then you come back and you anchor yourself. If you look carefully, you can see that that's where that drop is right there. Long term, that becomes the most important area, you know. So when this works out, crosses up and over, takes off. It's just like another platform, I suppose. And it is like the high liquidity shelf. So it may not go significantly below that at first. It may be like up here, in fact, and still have some pretty decent upside. The other thing to think about is like when this went up, it generates this other trend and this is trapped below it. So it's possible, although it doesn't have to be this perfect, it's possible that there's something similar in this motion right here. And this is kind of where we see that build out right there. It's like $50 a share or something. But we're way out in 2026 at that point, if that happens. So I would say like a shares only position is probably wise unless you see a breakout here or you get to the spring. Then again, what I was trying to say is like the good news is once that happens, whether it jumps the creek here or it jumps the creek later, you're probably going to have like a face melting rally. Hey, you need to spritz her if she's growling. I don't know, whoever's doing that. Timing-wise, this makes more sense. You see that, how this is like a widening, and then this could be like a narrowing. This actually makes quite a bit of sense to me, looking at the timing of that motion. There's a widening here on the RSI. I wonder if we see it kind of come back down. That's about a quarter. So this would be about a quarter. Yeah, that timing adds up. This comes back 2026. It's pretty darn close, guys. So I think this is a potentially great trade here. I mean, I know it's a ways off, but honestly, if it hit a spring at this point, I think it just takes off. It probably never comes back to these levels again. And who knows, maybe it doesn't go down that low. Maybe it stays higher again, like builds up a little higher and then just takes off in this pocket underneath the liquidity, but not through the bottom. Yeah, I don't even know what I do. Like, $561. we'll see. I mean, lots can happen too. Well, there could be some anticipation of some other news that we're just not aware of, good or bad. There's just a lot of what ifs. That's 2 years away, so, or at least a year away. So I'm looking at that as a creek jump, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And this could be a potential phase B with a spring coming in. I don't necessarily think that it couldn't be a spring right now. Like this could be a phase B, but it's very tight and weird if it is. So either way, it's like you either see it break out of this creek or you don't right now. And then it's pretty straightforward. Because then it's like if it doesn't and it breaks down, it's probably that this was a bigger phase B bottom. If it does, maybe this was the spring. Just didn't seem likely to me. Go right back up. And the question of like price targets later, I don't think there's a really great way to do it. I looked at this as like a 50-50. And it seems right to me because this is the original move off this bottom right here. And if you look at where that is from the new creek over where the presumed breakout would be, we're presuming that it happens somewhere around here, for example. It actually makes a lot of sense because that motion, that 50% is right here off this cliff, which is really where that distribution takes traction. So it's like a 50-50 around it. So presumably this could be up at like 560, something like that. And it'd probably take a long time to get there. It wouldn't be like immediate. There might be a way to figure it out, but I don't really know what it is right now. Actually, it already looks correct because that's the middle right there. It's like already built in. It's an interesting chart. That's too slow though. Another way to think about this would be like double top and a double bottom. That's also about the same. So again, like just kind of pouring fuel on that fire. This is like the same amount of time that it took on the top for that turnaround to happen. Maybe. Well, in any case, probably a good long-term play from 50 to 100. And then where it is now, it's a bit of a middle zone. If it goes above 150, I think it's strong. Well, Tesla's trying. Not really a huge fan of this move. Just don't really know what to make of it yet. It feels like it's not committing to it, so it certainly hasn't gone above the creek. I'm worried it's gonna like just reject and dump. But at least for now it pushed up above, so it did make a higher push. We'll see. This makes me nervous. I don't know. It's tough. I wonder if it goes up now. I wonder if it doesn't need to come back later. It's a wedge. Maybe we see something similar to this, where it's like a sideways action here, and it goes to meet itself. That seems possible, given like an earnings coming up. That seems possible. Gosh, Apple's just flat. This cannot figure out which way it wants to go. This is odd. This is a double down and up. I don't like that. I think it's missing like a drop. I think it needs to have that drop here. I think it's delaying the action for some reason. I want to see that 205. All right, slow day. Went through a lot of stuff. Massive fluctuation in viewership today. But that's okay. Totally normal for a day like today when, you know, I mean, the stock's green, AMC, GME are green. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're not like blowing up. Kind of still just consolidating. We're backed up a bit. We're above 3. That's good, but it's not really exciting. So I don't see that as a big problem here. Expectation wise, it seems about right. Really just wanting to see that spring finally. So anywho, hope you guys have a good one, and we will talk to you later.